Hi everyone and welcome to today's Meet the Expert session. I hope you're all well. My name is Amy and I work as part of the My World of Work live team within Skills Development Scotland. It is part of our job to help you understand about future careers in Scotland and what skills are going to be needed for those roles. So today we have James and Andy from the NES, which is the education body for the NHS, and we're really lucky to have them today. So today we're going to cover a quick overview of the healthcare sector. I'm going to introduce you to our today's experts, and then we're going to have a live Q&A session. I'd encourage you to get as involved as possible by using the question box to the right of your screen. It is completely up to you whether to take part or not. The questions can be asked anonymously, but if you do not feel comfortable with this, you don't have to participate. If you have a specific question for one of our experts, so if you have a specific question for Andy, please put the expert's name in with the question so we can direct the question to the right expert. Today's session will be recorded for any young people that couldn't make it today. It will be uploaded to the My World of Work YouTube channel in about a week's time, so you can go back and re-watch it and go back over anything that we've talked about today. So let's have a quick overview of the healthcare sector. So the healthcare industry now is the biggest in Scotland. Over 400,000 people work in the healthcare industry. So this is over 15% of all Scottish employment. However, there are over 5,000 vacancies last year. Most of these vacancies are due to skills shortages. So with the healthcare industry becoming more and more digitalised, we are missing gaps here with people with their tech skills, with their resilience, and all of these skills are going to be needed to fill those gaps. So from 2019 to 2019, it's estimated that about 80,000 jobs are going to be required to replace demand of an ageing workforce and to fill in these skills gaps. So, along with healthcare science, the top 5 future occupations in the healthcare industry are going to be carers, nurses, therapists, medical practitioners, and public health professionals. So, let's introduce you to our experts today. Today, we are incredibly lucky to have James Logie and Andy Dunn from the NHS. They are both healthcare scientists, but as you can see on the screen, they carry out different jobs. So, James works with testing and developing tests for research, while Andy is a bioengineer. So today we're going to hear from them and a little bit about their career journeys, and you'll have the opportunity to ask our experts any questions you might have. So we're going to start off with James, who's going to tell us a little bit about his job.
Thanks, Amy, and welcome everyone. It's really good to be able to join you all this afternoon and talk about my job. And a bit about how I got to the point I'm at today in my career. So yeah, as a healthcare scientist, that's a really broad term. It's an umbrella term that covers a huge variety of roles in the NHS. And I don't know a lot about all of them, but I can tell you more about the particular area that I work in, which is clinical biochemistry. So clinical biochemists are interested in the diagnosis and monitoring of disease, and that's done by all the samples we get sent to the lab, whether it be blood or urine or sweat or other fluids from the body, and we process those on a lot of automated analyzers, but lots of other specialist equipment. And clinical biochemists like myself, we look at those results and try and piece together the information, a bit like the pieces of a jigsaw, and we work with the clinical team. So we work with the doctors and nurses and try and help come up with an answer to what might be wrong with the patient. I mean, there's lots of other aspects to that. It's a lot of it sorting out problems, whether that be with the problems before we get the sample, mix-ups between the label that goes on the sample. There could be problems during the processing of the sample, sorting out all the problems with the equipment and the quality controls that make sure we're producing reliable results, or it could be afterwards and how we interpret those results. So there's quite a lot of aspects to it, which is what I really enjoy about the role. I suppose I should explain how I got into that role. I started off by doing a undergraduate degree in biological sciences, quite a long time ago now. But you do need that degree to get into the NHS as a clinical scientist. And once you have that, it's a 3-year training program to become a clinical scientist. But the training is really, really good. It prepares you for the job that you do, but it also requires further study. So, for example, you do an MSc as part of that, so a higher degree. So there's a lot of studying to do the job, but I find it really rewarding. So I think that probably sums up how I got into it and what it involves.
That's great, James. Thank you so much for sharing that with us, and we'll ask you some more questions later on. We've already got quite a few coming in. So next we'll move on to Andy, and he's going to tell us about his career as a bioengineer.
Hi everyone, and thanks Amy and James. My name's Andy Dunn, and I'm a bioengineer that works at Westmark, which is a department which is based at the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital in Glasgow. So it's quite a big department. It houses the wheelchair and seating service that I work in, but it also houses prosthetics, and also there's a gait laboratory as well. So I work in the wheelchair service in a team of 14 bioengineers, and we work alongside a team of occupational therapists as well. So obviously everyone knows what a wheelchair is, and probably most of you think of a wheelchair as quite a basic 4-wheel with a sort of basic seat on the top, if you like. My job is to assess patients that need perhaps a bit more support. So people that have got kind of fixed deformities or other problems with their posture where they just can't sit in a normal seat. So sometimes that's as simple as buying off-the-shelf components and just attaching them to quite a basic wheelchair. But the more sort of extensive work we do is literally casting patients for a seat. So probably the easiest way to think about this is we sit patients in 2 big bean bags, shape the bags against them to sort of a comfortable position for them. And then we take the air out of these bean bags and it goes quite firm. And then we use some machinery to take that shape into a computer, and then that's cut out of out of foam, to make 2 cushions that basically form a seat that they're sitting in. So we're basically tailor making a seat for the patient, and then there's a kind of process to manufacture that as well. Another sort of element of the job, if you like, as a bioengineer is being a bit like a wheelchair detective. So one of the important things we do is if anyone has an accident, we look at what happened, basically find out who was at fault. Was it something that the patient did, or was there something wrong with the actual wheelchair? And the reason that's important is we give out wheelchairs to over 50,000 patients across the west of Scotland. So although we're based in Glasgow, we cover across to Stirling, down to Dumfries and Lanarkshire, and even up to Oban. So we've got quite a lot of wheelchairs out there, and if there's a problem with one of them, we want to know about it to keep people safe. So I had a bit of a sort of not standard route into the job, if you like. So at uni, I did quite a strange degree, which was electronics with music. Basically left school being really good at maths and physics, but really passionate about music. Didn't really know what I wanted to do, if I'm honest, when I left school, so don't panic if you're in that boat. But when I went to uni, I sort of realised that maybe music wasn't the most stable profession and probably wasn't going to be becoming a rock star anytime soon. So I kind of stuck in at the engineering, and then ended up doing some postgraduate research with one of my supervisors at the spinal unit, which is also based at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. I really enjoyed working with patients there, but quickly sort of realised research maybe wasn't the thing that I was really passionate about. So I wanted more like a sort of hands-on job, if you like, with patients. So then I was looking around for jobs, and there was a position at Westmark to basically become a trainee bioengineer there, and you basically got taken on and sort of learnt on the job. And it's quite interesting what James touched on earlier is we are either clinical or healthcare scientists. They're kind of interchangeable terms, but it's quite an umbrella term for quite a lot of different jobs. So although I'm a bioengineer, I'm actually registered as a clinical scientist. And there's there is a prescribed training route that people can go on that James was talking about for 3 years. But I kind of came in a bit of an equivalence route, which was basically I had to learn on the job for 3 years and basically develop a similar portfolio that you would have to submit at the end to a body to become registered as a clinical scientist. But yeah, that's me. So I've been there 9 years now and thoroughly enjoy it. I'll pass it back to Amy for the minute.
Thank you, Andrew. I really want one of those beanbag cushions for my desk chair right now. I'm very jealous. So we have quite a lot of questions coming through. So I'm going to stick with you, Andy, for the first one. So one of our members in the audience is asking, what are the most important skills you use and why? So organisation, communication, do you think are the most important?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. I think you touched on one there. Communication is probably a really big thing, actually, because you can imagine giving wheelchairs out to people. We don't give wheelchairs to a specific set of people, if that makes sense. People can be in wheelchairs for all sorts of different reasons, even just because they've got elderly and they're not very mobile. But some young people that have got conditions such as cerebral palsy, for example, might have communication difficulties. So it's obviously you've got to have good listening skills, because a lot of our patients come in and you have to really listen to them to get to the root cause of what their problem is, if you like. But sometimes it's using, not just talking to them, it might be trying to communicate with them in a different way. Some of our patients can only really communicate with some sort of facial expressions or some kind of gestures, you know, so it's quite a challenging job in that respect sometimes, trying to communicate with the patients. And probably one of the other big skills I would say is problem solving. So it's kind of classic engineering, if you like. There's a problem, what's going to be the most effective solution? So I would say probably they're the two main things, I would say, problem solving and communication.
That's perfect. Thank you, Andy. James, because your job is slightly different, do you agree with Andy in those skills, or do you require a different set for what you do?
Yeah, similar. I would agree with Andy on communication, but the slight difference in my job compared with Andy's is I don't communicate with patients directly. So I communicate with other staff in the lab, and I communicate with the people ordering the tests, whether that be nurses or other doctors in the hospital or general or GPs. So it's usually other professionals in the NHS, but communication is really, really important, because you need to make sure that the advice that we give across is really clear, and there's no there couldn't be any confusion caused by what you're saying. So good verbal communication, because we do a lot of the communication on the phone or in person, but we also reply to emails and things where GPs might email us for some advice. So you need to be really clear there. But also the problem solving as well. Yeah, if there's a problems with one of our tests and we think the results are not quite up to scratch, then we need to get to the bottom of that quite quickly. And so yeah, you definitely need strong problem solving skills as well. So yeah, those would be my top two actually. So yeah, I agree with Andy.
Perfect. Thank you, James. We'll stick with you for one more question. So someone is asking, do you need to go to uni to get a job with the NHS?
So there'll be lots of jobs in the NHS where you don't require a degree. I mean, it's such a huge organisation. There's a whole variety of roles. There'll be roles in IT, human resources, trying to think, domestic services. There's so many aspects. So no, I don't think you absolutely necessarily need to have a degree. In labs where I work, a lot of the roles require a degree. There's also a branch of the workforce in labs that are termed biomedical support workers. So you can do that without a degree. You do require qualifications beyond school, and can't quite remember the names of those qualifications, but yeah, it's not absolutely essential. So, and some people come in without a degree and will go on to do a degree on the job. A bit like what Andy described, a sort of work-based training program. So yeah, there's different ways in it. It really depends on the actual role that you're interested in.
Thank you, James. That's really interesting. So we'll give you a little break and we'll ask Andy a question now. So Andy, a lot of our young people are thinking about their CV and thinking about how to start getting into the industry. So they're asking, what sort of experiences should you have in your CV, and how do you show on a CV that you have these skills or you have good communication?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably difficult at the moment. I've said this to other people recently, where probably when you're applying for potential, I mean, to become a clinical scientist, James is right, you would need to go to uni because they'll look for a science or engineering degree. But if you were then applying for like the training scheme to become a clinical scientist, you'd probably want to have visited departments, which is obviously extremely difficult at the moment with the pandemic and everything. But hopefully in time, a bit more back to normal. I'd certainly reach out to departments if possible, because it's such a wide area, healthcare science. Maybe trying to visit some departments to get an idea of what they do would be a good idea. But I mean, even just demonstrating things like communication, I'll be honest and say I wasn't a big fan of English as a subject at school, but actually I appreciate now why people encouraged me to take it at like higher level when I was at school, because actually the reason you do English is to develop your communication skills. I probably naively thought I didn't like English because I wasn't massively into reading books, but that's not really the reason I was learning those skills, if that makes sense. So, I mean, I would to get into kind of science, I mean, you probably want a good grounding of like maths and obviously the science subjects. Obviously, if you're thinking about doing science or engineering at university, or even I did technological studies was a subject when I was at school. But yeah, I can't believe I'm going to say this. If the 18-year-old self would probably be horrified, but I would definitely recommend English for developing good communication.
Perfect. Some very great advice there for our young people today. So we'll ask you another question. We've got so many coming through, so we'll try and answer as many as possible. But this is a very nice one that I'd be quite interested to know. Who influenced you the most to pursue a career in the healthcare sector?
Do you know, that's quite a difficult question to answer. I think like I said, when I left school, I was really good at maths and physics. My dad's an engineer, so I think I've got that element of kind of problem solving, if you like, and engineering kind of interest from my dad. And my mum was a bit of a carer when I was younger, so I've almost got a bit of a mix of my dad's kind of engineering problem solving skills and maybe my mum's kind of natural ability to care for people, which is kind of translated into working with patients. I think probably an influence as well was my wife. She is a nurse, so when I was at uni, she was at uni as well, studying nursing, and probably just some of the stories she was telling me were probably quite interesting, so probably I was quite keen to get into that. And then finally, when I was at uni, although I was studying engineering, one of my lecturers was doing research in the spinal unit. So although he was an engineering lecturer, he was looking at using engineering to help people with spinal cord injuries exercise. So he was probably quite a big influence on me as well. So probably my parents, my wife, and one of my lecturers. Probably will blame all of them.
That's a great way to look at it, the blend of your parents' career coming together. So we'll ask James the same question actually. So who influenced you to pursue healthcare science?
That's a really good question. I've been sitting trying to come up with an answer while Andy was speaking. And I don't know if I've quite got a good answer, but I was always just interested in science as a kid. I knew I wanted to work in science, but I didn't know which particular branch or which area. I was interested in all sorts, whether it be the universe and space or biology or plants. I just was always interested in it. My parents didn't do a job like this. My dad was a joiner before he retired. My mum was a shop assistant. We gave up work while we were kids and growing up. So I was the first in the family to go to uni. So I really don't know what inspired me to go to uni and do that, other than just natural interest in it. And then, yeah, as Andy touched on, family, they do have a big influence on you. I met my wife in work, so we worked for a drugs company after we did our degrees. That's where we met. We worked for a company that tests drugs in a lab, so that had a big influence as well on me in deciding whether I should stay in science or get something a bit more secure, because I didn't say at the start, I did a spell in research, which was really exciting, and I went to Boston. That was really good, being able to work in research over in the US. But I suppose as I sort of started to have my own family, I wanted something that was a bit more secure, and that's where I found out about the job in the NHS. And I think that had a big influence on it as well, because it's quite a stable career path once you're in the NHS. You know, it is a job for life, so that had a big influence on me too.
That's lovely. Thank you, James. So I'll stick with you for this question. We'll ask Andy after. So what is the most enjoyable part of your job?
I suppose it's ultimately knowing that the contribution that I make, it's helping patients, and although I don't see the patients, I realise that the answers that we come up with do help towards patient care, and you know, everybody uses the NHS, so it's quite nice to be a nice feeling to be part of that, contributing to something that helps society, I suppose. I mean, that sounds really altruistic, but it's, yeah, I mean, it's being able to do what you enjoy, the problem solving and using the science that I've been interested in and developed, but being able to use that and apply that to help patients, I think. I also do quite a bit of teaching now, which is an area that I never really thought I would be particularly good at or enjoy, because one job I knew I didn't want to do after uni was become a teacher. I didn't think I was naturally suited to it, but I teach other students, other trainees, hoping to do my job, but also like the medics who interpret the results. I do quite a bit of that in my job, and I do get quite a lot out of that. So yeah, I'd say the helping patients and teaching are probably my two favourite parts.
Excellent. And Andy, what is your favourite or most enjoyable part of your job?
It's probably going to a reasonably similar answer to James, to be honest. Kind of helping people really is the kind of the crux of it. I mean, it's not surprising. I think, to be honest, if you ask the majority of people that work, excuse me, within the NHS, then, you know, I mean, they're in an organisation like the NHS to help people. But yeah, I really enjoy working with patients. I'm quite fortunate that I cover a particular area. So although Westmark covers the west of Scotland, if you like, I specialise in covering Lanarkshire and adults as well. So I cover anyone over 18 in Lanarkshire. And because of the nature of the work that we do, we see the patients that have got more complex needs. We actually see the same types of patients maybe once or twice a year, if that makes sense. So you end up, because I've worked in that area now for 5 or 6 years, I've kind of developed quite a nice relationship with the patients, and whether it's their families or their carers. When they return, it's quite nice, you know what I mean? You kind of catch up on what they've been up to. It's probably not too dissimilar to them coming into a GP's appointment, hopefully, because it's a kind of familiar face when they come in. So there's a bit of chat as well as helping out with whatever it is they need done to their wheelchair. But yeah, just working with the patients and also being able to fix whatever their problem is, hopefully, and obviously being able to see the positive impact that has on them. It's quite good.
Yeah, it must be a very rewarding job as well. So touching on the training programs that you mentioned earlier, Andy, how do our young people find out about the work-based programs within the NHS? Do you know?
So probably there's quite a few kind of organisations, if you like. So like obviously James and I work for NHS Education for Scotland, so we work for the healthcare science team within that. Certainly getting in touch with our team, we could point you in the right direction. But in terms of kind of physics and engineering, there's a body called IPEM, which is the Institute of Physics and Engineering and Medicine. And there's also the Academy for Healthcare Science. So these kind of organisations, if you looked on their websites, they would give you a whole host of information regarding all the different, I mean, healthcare science is one aspect to it, but there's also, there's other jobs, there's like healthcare technologists. I think I touched on it in a session we had before, Amy, where you mentioned there's kind of like modern apprenticeships as well. We've got a big depot over at Yoker that manufactures some of the kind of custom built stuff that we do. And we had a guy that came through the Modern Apprentice program and worked there. So he kind of did a few days work for us a week and also went to college. So yeah, definitely the organisations that I mentioned, or getting in touch with ourselves at NES, we could hopefully point you in the right direction, because there's quite a few different routes, and there's a big variety of jobs. So it's quite a difficult thing to initially point somebody in one direction, if that makes sense. I know that's quite vague, but.
Thank you, Andy. Not vague at all. So I'll ask the next question to James. We do have a lot of questions, so I'll try and answer as many as possible. So one of our young people is wondering, does it make an impact on what university you attend? Does it make a difference if you attend, Oxford or just, an average university? Does that affect, getting into the career at all?
I wouldn't have thought so, to be honest. I think probably more about what you achieve in your degree. I mean, it is competitive to get into, and you do need at least a 2-1 or upper second class degree, but many will have first class degrees that are successfully getting into clinical scientist training programs, and often they'll have actually experience and qualifications beyond that. So I've got a PhD, which I did before I got into this. It's not necessary, but many of us do, because you probably picked up on what I've been saying so far. There's a lot of technologies and new tests and things, so having those research skills that you get in a PhD help. But no, I don't think the university is crucial. You would need to get a good result, though. I think that's fair to say.
Perfect. So we'll stick with you to ask another question, James. So a lot of our young people are thinking about their CVs already, which is fantastic. In particular, we have quite a few questions relating to sort of extracurricular activities or volunteering or Duke of Edinburgh. So what sort of volunteering or activities do you think would be good to have going into applying to university or a job in the healthcare sector?
That's quite a tough one. I think, yeah, do what you enjoy doing first and foremost. I don't think you should do things because you think it will help you go down a particular route. No, that one stumped me a bit.
We can pass over to Andy if you want.
Yeah. Stuck on that one. Yeah. Do you have
I like what you said about doing something that you enjoy, though. That's probably the most important thing. But Andy, do you have anything to add?
I think I'm going to struggle here as well. It's quite a difficult question, but I think James is right. I mean, I think, if I'm honest, if you looked at my sort of CV when I came out of school, it was all going to be heavily music oriented. I was in like loads of bands and stuff when I was at school. I played a bit of sport as well. I played rugby and stuff, but I think things where you're probably working with a team is probably quite a good thing, whether that's sport, music, if you're in an orchestra or something, or like you mentioned, I think someone mentioned Duke of Edinburgh, so perhaps if you're involved in like the Cubs or the Scouts, these kind of organisations, I think being able to demonstrate that you're good at working with other people, that actually develops communication. You have to adapt your communication to a wide variety of people. But I would totally agree with James. I'd like to think, stick to what you're passionate about, and hopefully that influences what you do for a job, rather than steering yourself towards something because you feel you have to. I would agree with that.
Yeah, that's great. I think it's important to mention as well, whether it be extracurricular activities or, a part-time job that our young people might have, to take the experience from that to help you, rather than seeking out new experiences to transfer your skills instead of trying to start from scratch. So Andy, can we ask you another question? So someone is wondering if you can please give them some tips for writing a personal statement for becoming a clinical scientist or an engineer, and we'll pass it on to James after yourselves.
Have I got a pass? I'll chuck it to James Hamilton.
You can pass if you wish.
No, I'm changing. That's quite difficult. It's probably, I mean, I guess it's just highlighting your strengths. I guess it's like, again, it's probably, I mean, this might sound silly and obvious, but don't fabricate things, you know, don't make out you're something that you're not, because that's just going to, it might get you into something, but then that would probably just become clear quite quickly that maybe your strengths aren't where you thought they were, or you've made out that they were. So just be true to yourself, you know, it's whatever your strengths are, highlight and emphasize them, and just make the most of whatever experiences you've had in life. So whether it's things at school, like you said, extracurricular things can be just as important as your grades at school. So whatever you've done and achieved, just emphasize them, and probably reflect as well. So think about, like you said, not only what have you achieved, but actually what did you get from those things. So probably a bit of reflection. I'm not sure I could give much more advice than that. I think because it's quite a personal thing, you know, it depends what experiences you've had so far.
Those are some great tips. Thank you, Andy. James, do you have anything to add to that? Any golden nuggets of wisdom that you've collected over the years?
No, I think Andy touched on the important points about highlighting your strengths. Obviously, I mean, you're trying to sell yourself, but it has to be an honest picture of who you are and what your main selling points are. But a bit of advice I was given over the years was to it's more for application forms, trying to line up your skills and your strengths with the what we call the person specification. You know, what they're trying to look for in the post that they're trying to fill. So yeah, trying to highlight the really important ones that match up with what they're looking for, and that'll be different for each of the roles. But you know, if it's a healthcare scientist role, it'll probably be things like problem solving and communication. So if you can say, you know, you've done team sports, so you've got good team skills, and you communicate well, then I think that would help. I think that's
perfect. Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you, James. We have another question asking about your internship. So what was it like working in America, and is there any differences between the US and the UK?
It was amazing. Yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed working in Boston. It's just a really amazing city in terms of just so much going on, if you like, sports and going to visit really nice places. But the actual work was really interesting as well. So I worked in a research lab over there. To get into that, I just speculatively wrote off to loads of labs and just said, look, really want to come and get some experience. There's quite a lot of rejections, but one or two invited me to come for interview. So I went over for a bit of a holiday and went to visit these labs, and had interviews with some of the people over there, and got invited to work in a research lab. Culture's a little bit different in America, so they get less holidays. And in academic research, it was very intense in terms of, you know, people would put in long hours. But yeah, you got a lot out of it. I mean, some of the research there is world renowned and gets published in like the top journals, etc. So that was a really useful experience for me to get into doing my PhD and getting into the job that I'm doing now. But yeah, if you like traveling, then I'd recommend working overseas, and in America was a really good place to work. And now's the time to do it when you're young, I suppose. It just gets a bit more difficult as you get older.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I am doing the same, although my internship is in Inverness, not quite the US, but maybe one day. If we move over to Andy, I'm just going to ask a couple of quick fire questions before we move on to the last one, because we're running out of time. So the young people are wondering sort of a ballpark figure of salary, first of all.
For the job that I do?
Or a healthcare scientist in general. You don't have to give specifics.
I would think, I'm not sure, horribly, I don't know what band James on, for example, but I would say like an average, maybe a band 7 at the moment probably tops out. I think it tops out higher than I think it is. I'd probably say about 45k, but you don't start on that, if that makes sense, as increments. So I think it starts maybe 30 to 35. This is once you're registered as a clinical scientist. When I was a trainee, I was a band 6, for example, maybe the starting salary was somewhere between 25 to 30k. I'm plucking numbers out here. And then, but by the time you're at the top of a band 7, you could get up these days anyway, and get up to like 45, 46k. But I mean, if you get into management in the NHS, you can get, I mean, some of the managers get paid 60, 70k. So that might be surprising for some people. You know, people might not think people in the NHS can earn that much. So.
Thank you for sharing that with us, Andy. So we'll have one last question for both of you. I'm so sorry that we can't answer everybody's, but just a nice one to end on. Just if you have any snippets of advice for anyone applying or thinking about pursuing a career in the healthcare sector, if you get a minute or so each to answer that, and then we can finish up. So we'll start with you, Andy.
So kind of golden nuggets. We probably covered most, I think.
Probably.
Kind of racking my brain here. I think like what I said earlier, just play to your strengths. You know, kind of James has echoed the same things. You know, think about what you're good at. That's kind of what, although I came out of school not having a clue what I wanted to do, I kind of relied on at that point what I was good at, and I think I've always kind of fell back on that, and that's kind of, I've kind of done okay, if that makes sense, because there's no point. Don't get me wrong, I was really passionate about music, but perhaps didn't have the talent to back it up. So maybe it was a bit more reliable. Don't get me wrong, I've got real respect for people that, particularly that are in the artistic kind of areas where they really want to succeed at these things. But I think if you fall back on where your natural strengths are, then you'll probably do well in life. So that would be my top tip, I think.
Thank you, Andy. And James, any last words of advice for our young people today?
No, I'd agree with Andy. Do what you enjoy, and the opportunities will come from that. I think a way to get into sort of find out more about science beyond schools is to do the sort of things over the holidays, whether it be like the big science festival that's usually happening in the spring, but obviously with the pandemic that's going to have a new look. But there's so much going on online now. You can seek out what's going on there, or you know, is there a science club in your school, or could you even like suggest setting one up or something, and that might, you know, play into sort of leadership skills and team working and things like that. But yeah, just doing what you enjoy, I think, sums it up.
Perfect. Thank you so much to you both for answering all our questions today. I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and I personally have learned a lot that I didn't know about healthcare science. So I'd like to say a massive thank you for your time today. And thank you to the audience for all your questions. I'm so sorry we couldn't answer them all, but we had an influx of questions, which is great. And hopefully following up that you can find out information on myworldofwork.co.uk, where you will find lots of job profiles, not just in the healthcare sector. There are also lots of tools that will help you identify your own strengths, your own skills, and you can always talk to your careers advisor as well. If you'd like to find out about any apprenticeships, either modern, foundation or graduate, you can head over to www.apprenticeships.scot. So thank you so much for today. I hope you have a lovely afternoon, and thank you for joining.